This is Laborc, and it is so nice to have you here. These are the paints you need. Guys, seriously, most of you just come here because of the mustache, right? It's so magnificent, isn't it? It is. This is the last hero from the core box. We came a long way. If you want to see how Papa Laborc painted the rest of the heroes, you can check it out on this playlist. Okay, I used Vallejo's black primer and started with the face with Bugman's Glow. This is a tricky one. First of all, it's a female face, so it's easy to go in and make separated highlight areas with high contrast, and in the end, if we do that, there is a good chance it will look like a guy. Women faces have softer and feminine characteristics than a man. Well, in most cases. As you see, I sketch out the lines of the face and I leave a portion of it black. This way I can make it less round and more feminine, and because we use the black primer, the parts I don't cover can be really dark shadows, which is quite believable since she's wearing a hood. Then I glaze over this layer, starting the brush stroke in the black areas and ending it in the bright areas. This will make a nice transition for the face and make the transition from black to Bugman's Glow nice and smooth like Granny's butt cheek. I painted the lips with corn red, but later I changed my mind because it was just too red, so I rather use Blood River Flash, which is a bit more brown and would look more like a natural lip color than a makeup. Whichever you prefer, only paint the lower lips and a tiny portion of the upper lips. If it starts to look like one of those Instagram abominations, then you painted too much of the upper lips. Also, at this point I realized she had a little bump at the corner of her mouth. You need to sculpt that with a blade, and if you look at the Simon pics of the painted mini, you can tell the artist had a hard time figuring out the mouth as well. Now add some KD and flesh tone to the Bugman's Glow mix and increase the highlight values on the nose, cheeks and on the chin. You can cover her face right side with that, which is left to us if you are watching the video. So it would look like the light is coming from the left. After that we go in with pure KD and flesh tone to increase the contrast a bit more. You see it blends in nicely. Focus on the forehead and the right cheek and the mouth and the nose parts, and give it a little glaze. Lastly, I add some ice yellow to the KD and flesh tone and put some highlights on the lower lips and on her right cheek. Super tiny bit on the lips, so it would look like they are a bit glossy. Then I start working on the mask with mechanical standard grey. My layers are more like a glaze to make the highlights smooth. The mask is quite symmetrical, so I place some parallel highlights on the left side of the mask. I use this color to pick out some locks of her hair. Since her hair is black, be really moderate with the amount of grey you put on, otherwise it will look like grey and not black. Then with the same consistency, I add some Administratum grey, so it will give some shininess to the mask and hair as well. I painted the eyes using ivory. I didn't paint the iris because it has a nice effect like Batman if you leave it like that. And with that mask it makes perfect sense to me. Obviously if you want to paint the iris, go ahead because the eyes are rather fine sculpted, it wouldn't be much of a challenge. With the head done, we move on to the cloak. Cover all of it with Word Bearer's red and leave only the extreme shadows black between some of the folds on the cape. Now glaze over those extreme shadows to smooth it out like Granny's butt cheek, like we did in the previous steps. Our mid-tone will be Vazdaka red. Cover 80% of the word barriers layer, picking out the folds. After that, glaze over the Vazdaka layer so it would blend in nicely with word barriers red. As you see, Vazdaka red and word barriers red are close to each other in value, so these colors almost blending in on their own. I use these thin layers because that's just the way I paint. If you are comfortable using thick layers or want to use wet blending for these parts, go ahead. I'm more familiar with this technique, so I can paint faster this way. As Granny Laborc always said, do what you want, but don't ask me for money. So I live by her words every day. Only highlight the parts on her back where the light would catch her cloak, on the top rim and the bottom half. For the highlights, mix some sunny skin tone to the Vazdaka red. This will increase the light values, so start pick out the folds on the cape. Do not really bother placing highlights under her chest. The light there would be blocked because she is leaning towards. So this way our mini look more high contrast. It would make sense to put highlights under her chest if it's not a cloth. But cloth is not really a reflective fabric unless it's silk or velvet. Blend the new layer in with some glazing. Remember guys, same brush motion every time. Now add some more sunny skin tone to our Vazdaka red and increase the contrast even more. As you see, I use thin layers so I can blend in the colors more easily. Focus placing the highlights around the face more so our focal point stays there. Then I wanted to increase the red hue of the cloak, so I glazed some corn red next to the brightest highlights. This is a very diluted glaze and you only need 2 coats to achieve a nice hue. I even glazed it over some of the highlights near the rim of the cloak, so our attention stays on the head. To increase the definition of the holes on the cloak, I edge highlighted the lower part of the holes with sunny skin tone, then glazed some corn red over it. Remember, to have nice edge highlights, you need base layer consistency and use the side of your brush's tip. Alrighty, now it's time for the NMM. The blades and armor. Cover all the metal parts with Incubi darkness. This dark gold green will be a nice complementary color for a reddish magenta cloak. Leave some black between the armor panels, if you can, so we don't have to blackline them later. Now, let's sketch out the highlights with Mechanicus Standard Grey. This grey will cover nicely even if you apply it as a thin layer. We need to do all the highlights for all the metal parts except for the crossguard on the daggers. Metal is super reflective, so it doesn't matter how big or how many highlight areas you want to create, but be aware of the size of your highlights. If these Mechanicus Standard Grey parts are too small, you are going to limit yourself how much color you can introduce to them in the next steps, because you simply will run out of surface to paint. Don't forget about the back of the mini where she hides her arsenal of weapons. There are some metal stuff too. When you are done, it is time for the grey that Papa Laborc is basically addicted to. Administratum Grey. On the daggers I just sketched a single gradient on each of the blades. And I leave the bottom as it is because 1. It's a bit tricky to reach and don't want to create highlight areas that would be extremely difficult to reach and stain the cloak along the way. And 2, the light is coming from above, so it would be believable that those parts are not reflective because the top part blocks the light for them. And same goes for the graves. Put your brightest and biggest highlights where it is easy to reach and it makes sense. It's metal, so it's got a lot of secondary reflections, so be creative as much as you like. Try to paint around the rivets. It's not easy, don't worry if you can't manage to paint around them, we will blackline some later. Be extremely thorough when placing these highlights, go around all the metal parts and double check if you can so you don't leave out some important areas that would sell the metallic effect. After that we glaze over the administratum grey layer. Little bit more glazing is required on the blades, but you only need 2 or 3 layers for the armor to make it smooth. Papa Laborc prefers smooth surfaces like Granny's butt cheek, but if you like it a bit more rough, that is perfectly fine. Now, blackline along the armor panels and the rivets. We use black for that and the thin base layer consistency, so the paint would flow off nicely from our brush, and because we are using black it will cover nicely anyway. Shape your brush to have a nice tip and carefully apply it over the rivets. It will increase the definition of the rivets and armor panels tremendously, so please don't skip this part. You will be thankful to Papa Laborc after you see how much better your mini looks after blacklining. Now for the final highlights, we use pure ivory in thin layers. As you see, I stipple some small dots on the blades, so when I glaze over them, they will blend in super nice. You can also do some edge highlights on the armor too, so it will be super crispy and nice. You see, I try to follow the shapes of the armor to make the effect more realistic and only apply this color inside the administratum grey layer, so it would make sense for our eyes as we look at the metallic parts. For the final step of the NMM, I did some edge highlights with white. Be super careful guys, because those edges are not as crispy as they first appear, so don't expect perfect results, but I guess they turned out okay. Obviously, if you make a mistake here, you probably need to redo the blades, so I have to slap on your tiny hand, but aching little hands are proof of improvements. So don't let that take away your excitement about painting NMM. You need that kind of frustration and challenge in your mini painting journey, so you can grow. Now for her boots and leather sheets and the wood parts of the weapons on her back, I used Tondia Brown in base layer consistency. Then I highlighted those parts with Baneblade Brown and used that color for the string of the crossbow on her back. I'm not sure if it's a crossbow or a gun because it has a barrel, so maybe it's a barreled crossbow? Anyway, it looks cool. Apply the paint with some small spots and dots on her boots so it will have some texture. Now all we have to do is paint the crossguard of the daggers. This will be the fastest and simplest NMM you ever saw. Because I forgot to record the second part of it, but just cover the crossguards with Baylor Brown and then put some ice yellow on the top part and highlight parallel with the blade's center line, so it would make sense. You do that with base layer consistency. Then apply some ivory edge highlights, and that's it. It looks good and it was super fast and simple. It's not super high contrast, but hey, it's got the job done. And that's about it guys. Feydra is done with the rest of the heroes. So thank you for joining me on this little painting adventure. A huge thanks to my patrons who support this kind of videos, with a special shout out to Jonathan Rhodes, Dominic Reitman, and Trying to Paint Menace! If you like these videos and want to support Papa Laborc, then go to Patreon, you can find a link to it in the video description. You will have early access to these videos and you can vote on the next mini. I hope the rest of your day will be as smooth as a granny's butt cheek.